are going to start off with a few questions for Chasten. So will you tell us a little about how you grew up and how your experiences has impacted the person you are today?
Sure, I'll try to do it in a nutshell. I grew up in Traverse City, Michigan. It's a smaller city in northern lower Michigan. I lived there for 18 years. I studied abroad. My high school, senior year in high school, I went to Germany, mostly as a way to get out. It was really me running away from home and trying to find a space that I felt comfortable, like I belonged. I went to community college for 2 years. When I came back, summer I came out. Didn't go so well at home, so I moved out for a little bit, lived out of my car, lived on friends' couches. Got my way through community college. Mom and Dad called me back home. Our relationship is wonderful now. Big allies of ours. Decided to go over to Wisconsin, finished a bachelor's degree in theater and global studies. Theater is the thing that saved me. It's the place that made me feel alive and represented and welcome. So right after undergrad, I worked at a children's theater in Milwaukee, where I brought theater education to Milwaukee Public Schools in the greater Milwaukee region. Moved to Chicago, worked for Starbucks for health insurance, did a lot of substitute teaching, just trying to figure out what I was supposed to do with that theater degree. Went back to grad school anticipating to become a full-time classroom teacher. At the same time, I fell in love with a certain mayor in South Bend, Indiana. Yeah, he's pretty cool. Wrapped up my master's degree, taught in South Bend for a while. My previous job was at a Montessori school in South Bend, and I made the choice to leave teaching and to be on the trail full time with Pete, spreading our message across the country and helping people get to know us a little better. So that's the nutshell, but hopefully I get to tell you a little bit more and expand a little bit more on that this evening.
That's really exciting just to hear.
You know what? I have a theater voice. Can you hear me in the back? No, it's this one. It's this guy. Yes. All right. So I got it off. Maybe it is that one.
Is it me?
Right. We're good. Okay.
It's like Parks and Recreation. You guys watch it?
We're making it work. Okay. Oh yeah, that's much better.
need, like,
Oh
get on
God,
your
that was
feet
a scary microphone. Okay, so you stole a few of our questions, and we're going to move on to the next. So as we'll know, so I did enjoy backstage. We talked a bit about your experience at a Montessori school and the differences that you experienced in the public school setting versus Montessori. I'd love to hear a little bit about what that illuminated for you in regards to privilege and the differences in education from a public to private setting, and what that indicates about what work needs to be done in the public school sector.
Yeah, we could talk about this for hours. So I left as such a teacher, right? Like, oh, let me restore that for you. Very Montessori. I left South Bend Public Schools. Pete was the mayor. I didn't feel like the politics meshed very well. Remember, I was filling in as a long-term substitute teacher in a class. I went to a staff meeting one day and had an idea about restoring recess for middle schoolers. Just thought they really needed an opportunity to run around and just be outside. And someone said, "Is that your idea or is that the mayor's idea?" It's like, well, this might not be the best. So I decided to leave, and I didn't think that I would teach, but then I found Montessori and completed a credential in secondary Montessori education, and it was night and day. So the pay was still terrible, but I had full, complete autonomy and control over my classroom. I had great support from administration. I got to decide what I taught. We took one standardized test a year, and we never told the kids about it. And we would, we'd give them like a week's heads up, like, oh, by the way, next week we're going to do that test. We never prepared for it. We did the test, we put it away, and we went about our day because we didn't reduce our students to a test score, and we didn't reduce our teachers to a test score. And it was rather something the school felt like they had to do to be in good faith with the state versus using it as a way to measure growth or to measure teacher success. Predominantly wealthy community. So when you're paying tuition, obviously you need to afford tuition, so most of the people that sent their kids there could afford it. Limited financial aid. And when you're surrounded by privilege, you sort of lose sight sometimes of the challenges that other people are facing. So as a person who had taught in public education for a long time and who had been involved in public education settings, it was really important to me to incorporate social justice into my curriculum and to help my students open up their eyes to the larger world around them, that it's not this nuclear community of people who look like you and act like you, and when you have a problem, mom and dad don't always solve it. In fact, for some people, there's not even a mom and dad there. For me, we had a great program partnership with the South Bend Center for the Homeless, where we would go once a week, and my students got to spend time with residents and children there at their Montessori classroom. And when I ever needed something, usually the administration responded, or the parents responded with funding. I wanted to take my kids hiking in the Appalachian Mountains, and the funding appears. When I was in Chicago Public Schools in grad school, I was with one teacher who had a little over 100 students every day, and spent a couple months with her, shadowing her in her classroom. And this is a teacher who had no support staff. Some of her children were coming to school homeless. Mom or dad was incarcerated. The only meal they got was the Pillsbury pancakes in a prepackaged heated container with a carton of juice that they got in the morning. Not sleeping, because some of them were housing insecure. And then we expected them to learn in a classroom of 40 students cramped in a very hot space, where a teacher was reduced to her test score and was only measured by the ability to get children to succeed on one standardized test. So it was night and day for me, being in a classroom like that, where most of these kids are just coming to school to survive. They need the food, or they're coming to be loved because no one else outside of those four walls is showing them the love and empathy that they need. And then at Montessori, I had everything handed to me, and I was able to hand everything to my students, and we were able to get much more work done, talking about the world around us and their place in the world, because we were afforded that opportunity. We had the resources that we needed. I don't want to stay on my soapbox too long, and we could talk about this for a long time, but we have a lot of work to do in our public school system, especially to not only give teachers a raise, but to give them the support that they need. Teachers are on the front lines. It is a battlefield in that classroom. And I feel like policymakers assume that when children go to school, they're ready to learn. And unfortunately, most of them are not. They're just trying to survive.
Thank you. And just to follow up on that, you talked a little about social justice. So how would you begin to empower students to raise their voice, but to raise their voice in a way that they could be proud of, especially in the context of our political situation that we have today? Can you share a little of that with us?
I think often students are patted on the head and told they're the future and wait for their place in the world. And when you get out into the real world, I hear that sort of language repeatedly. In my classroom, when a kid complained about something, I asked them what they were going to do about it. I encouraged them to write letters to their mayor. Sometimes that was my husband. And they showed up. City council meetings, they wrote their council members, they wrote their state legislators. When they complained, we found a solution, or at least an actionable item, so that they could do something about it. And with our curriculum, we tried to teach as much history through current events as possible. So to peel back the curtain a little bit for students and show them how history affects the modern day, and root that in realism for them, that the world is real now, that you are in the real world now, and these are the problems that you are going to inherit. Which also, it involves empowering teachers as well, and to give them the opportunity to change their curriculum, to root it in current events, to have the creativity to do something differently with their students. Specifically with students of privilege, I felt like it was more important to open their eyelids and expose their eyeballs to the realities of so many other Americans that are very unlike them. And that as a teacher who was empowered to do that, I knew I had full right to say, we're going to stop everything we're doing and we're going to devote all of our time and energy on one project. And sometimes it was a project of the student's choice. What do you want to learn about? What's bothering you? Well, one time they didn't understand what was happening in the Middle East. So we stopped everything we were doing and focused on the Middle East for 2 weeks. I had the ability to do that because that's what was like pulling at their heart and their minds, right? So we got to do creative things in our classroom and empower them to learn about the things that they wanted to learn about. And if they ever complained, empower them to do something about it. And that's why we went out into the community, and that's why we did things. And I think my students were some of the most well-versed citizens in our community about homelessness, because they studied it every week. Any article that came out, my 7th and 8th graders were reading about it. We went to the Center for the Homeless every week so they could see people that came from different walks of life. And as a teacher, I had the ability to do that with them.
That's awesome. As a former history teacher, I really think that you hit the nail on the head around the idea that students need to know that they're part of history right now. And I think that one of the greatest challenges our nation faces, and one of the greatest crises in our schools, is around the teaching of history and civics. I think it's almost strategic to give a very base education to some of our most vulnerable students in an effort to keep them outside of the know, right? Because if you're outside of the know and outside of the current understandings of the world and the way that it works and the history that informs it, how are you going to be prepared to be an engaged citizen, right? So it's beneficial to people in privilege to keep the masses outside of the know, So I really appreciate that. So one of the questions that we wanted to talk to you about as well was around this idea of how has life changed for you? April and I are both school principals. I know my wife is a PhD candidate right now, and between our schedules, we're busy, but I can't even imagine what it looks like for you, considering all 10 events that you went to today that you told us about, and flying here and flying there. So how do you and Mayor Pete, keep yourselves grounded, balanced, and leading a life that has some semblance of normal?
Yeah, my day used to be you wake up, go to school, and you come home, right? And then occasionally go to the community event with Pete. Yesterday we were in New York, flew to Chicago, did some events in Chicago, got up, caught a 6 a.m. flight to Philadelphia, did some amazing things today, met with teachers unions, we met with Project Home, we met with LGBTQ leaders, we did a fundraising event before this. My life is literally in the hands of the people who are walking in the back of the room right now. They tell me where to go, they tell me what I'm doing. It's new, and it's really challenging. Sometimes it's really scary, it's exhausting. When I got out of bed this morning at 4 a.m., I turned to Pete and I said, the things I do for you. But it's also really exciting. This opportunity, this moment in history, this moment in our shared story, to be out on the trail and to show people what a gay couple looks like, what a loving gay couple looks like, what a gay couple in the White House would look like, what a first gentleman would look like. And I feel empowered by that opportunity to go out there and show people, not tell people, but to show people what we're about. And that's why, thanks. We're not followed by cameras when I fly into a city and go meet with homeless LGBTQ teens and go meet with teachers unions and nurses and teachers, but it's just about bringing people to the table. So that is really exciting for me. Never thought these would be the shoes I'd be in. But when you're given that opportunity, when you're given that platform, I don't know how long this platform is going to last, but I want to make sure as long as I have it, I do good things with it. So life is exhausting. I'm tired a lot, I'm dehydrated a lot, we don't eat a lot. There's some pretty rough sides of campaigning, but then you go and you meet people like you. And then I go and sit down with LGBTQ teenagers who are facing homelessness. Then I get to invite them to a table and look at them across the table and say, I hope you know that we care about you, and we love you, and that you matter, and that there's space in this world for you. Because when I was their age and when I was sleeping in my car, I didn't have anyone sitting on the other side of the table telling me that. So it gives me goosebumps to even talk about it, because as a 29-year-old man, I never thought that this is where I'd be in life. So it's worth waking up at 4 a.m. It's worth flying across the country. It's worth being in 3 or 4 states a day. It's worth getting heckled in rural Iowa. It's just worth putting up with all of it, because there are millions of people in this country who are aching and scratching and itching and waiting for somebody to talk to them and talk about them and root politics in their lived experience. And if I can do that just simply by showing up, I'll get out of bed at 4 a.m., no problem.
So you talked about marginalized individuals, and you also talked about theater and how theater is a love of yours. How did you decide or come to a place where you use theater as a safe place for you, as a safe place for the community, and as a safe place for students?
Thank you. So bullied a lot in high school. Theater's the only room I felt like I could run away to. Mrs. Bach, my high school teacher, she just knew I needed that space. So I, in free periods or lunch or after school, I would go find her in the theater and help clean brushes in the shop. And I just felt like that space was so inviting. And to have a teacher like that, I had so many bad teachers too, who just made school a really unsafe place to be. And Mrs. Bach made a space for me that I could just come and be in. I would go sit in the theater when it was empty, and knew where the light switches were and how to turn the stage lights on and just sit and feel okay and feel safe. I went into nursing right away because I felt like that's what I was supposed to do. I felt like I had to choose a career in which I could, get a sustainable job. And I failed a lot. Part of it was where I was at that time in life. University wasn't about academics for me. So I just went back to what I knew, and I went back to theater. Because it was okay to be different. It was okay to be goofy and loud, and I found a great community where people just lifted you up, and so that's where I felt safe. When I went to First Stage in Milwaukee, I was just teaching introductory theater classes. I was teaching out in Milwaukee Public Schools. We would bring theater curriculum into the schools. We would teach history or simple machines through theater, getting kids out of their chairs and being goofy. And then we devised a program for students with autism. And it was a pretty new program in Milwaukee, and we had about 20 kids that first summer. It was one-on-one instruction. Long time in development, and the first time we had those kids in the space, we had no idea what was going to happen. So we had some musical theater, some dance, some acting, and working one-on-one with a student in an environment that saved me, that told me I mattered, and working with a student that had never been afforded those opportunities, and for parents themselves who had been shown that there were limited opportunities for their children. When we came into the space together, and I asked a kid to do something silly with his hands and his feet, and it took me a week to get him to that place where most of the day it was taking a break in the hallway, taking a break in the sensory-free room, taking a break to eat, which is what a lot of teachers go through as well. And then by the end of the week, seeing that kid light up and get up in front of his friends and his family and perform for 5 seconds. It's life-changing. It's life-changing for the kid, it's life-changing for the parent, it's life-changing for the family, and it's changing for the community. Because we all do better when we all do better. And now you have one more citizen who believes in himself and sees space for himself. That just showed me the power that theater can do. So I've always brought theater to everything I do, to always use it to shake up my curriculum. It's what I wrote my master's thesis on in grad school. I just want to empower teachers to use creativity in their classroom, to break the mold, to get the kids out of the desk, get them moving, to think differently. And theater is what saved me, and it's still what drives my work today.
Yes, Theater Geeks Unite. I also have an undergrad in theater, and I tell people every day that it is something that has helped me prepare for leadership in ways that I can't count. It certainly helps you learn how to empathize and think on your feet, and to create, and to also work within community, right? So I think that's, yeah, and good for your life in politics, that's right, because there's gonna be times that a microphone breaks when you're on stage and you're just gonna have to go with it. The show must go on. So I really think that that's just as important as what you said about history and about serving students who are vulnerable in schools. So I guess my big question for you is, you know, what would you like to see shift in the Department of Ed? I know there's a lot of work to be done. And how critical do you think it is to ensure that the person leading the Department of Ed is a bona fide educator?
I wish I could just let my face give the answer. The Department of Ed is shameful right now. But keep in mind that there are good people on the inside who are still on the front lines for us, who are trying. They're just not being led in the right way. We need an educator running the Department of Education. We need someone who cares about public education, who believes in public education. That's a good place to start. There are so many things, like we said earlier, we could be on our soapbox all night. There are so many things that have to change. Teacher support, teacher pay. But the thing that I worry most about is the attack on the humanities, the attack on civics, the attack on the arts. We don't have a strong enough conversation about what we're doing to prepare the next generation of citizens in this country. I feel like the conversation is often around STEM, which there's a place for STEM, and I don't mean to speak ill of STEM. But when you cut the arts, and you cut the humanities, and you cut civics classes, and you cut history classes, you're cutting humanity out of education. I think some of the best work I've ever done is in the theater classroom. I've seen students of mine who barely scrape by. And then we go into the gym and we do an hour of theater where I task them with, a game. They always think they're playing games, but it's where the real meat of education comes in. Give them a silly game to play. You need to accomplish this task, and they have to work together as a team. They have to communicate with one another. We're reinforcing active listening. We're reinforcing eye contact, reinforcing empathy, and they get it. They just get it, and the real meat comes in that debrief. Right? They think they're playing games, and then we come to the circle afterwards and we talk about it. Which is the same thing we do in civics classes. We called it personal knowledge class, where I taught. We had seminar for an hour every week, where students were given a very strict set of guidelines in the way we talk to one another, the way we disagree with ideas, we don't disagree with people, the way we put kindness in our words and our actions, the way we look at someone in the eyes when we're addressing them. That in of itself was enough for some of my kids. Enough for them to eventually get to the point where they can look a peer in the eye, especially in the 8th grade, and say, you know what, I agree with you, I was wrong. Thank you for helping me see something differently. How often do you hear a teenager say that? That was the best work. And when we strip away that kind of work from the schools, we devalue it, we say it's fluffy, it's not worth it, we don't fund it, what are we boiling down to? We're not building citizens, we're building robots then. And we have to empower teachers, and we have to empower students. And I think the best way we do that is through civics education and arts education.
Perfect, because we were actually on the last question. So you touched a little bit on empathy, you touched a little bit on leadership. So this last question will focus on servant leadership. How will you embody servant leadership as the first gentleman?
It's important to show up. Like, watch yourself, Chasten. I knew what Michelle Obama stood for. I don't know what Be Best is. You got to show up for people. You're given an opportunity to show up for people, empower people. Part of being given that platform and that opportunity is that it is your job to do the most good for the most people, the best way you can. And the reason I'm on the trail now, like I told you, is to model for people what that looks like. What it looks like when someone shows up and says, you matter, I care about you, and also to show up and say, I don't have the answers. I was just at an event before this where someone was asking me about what I'm going to do for different communities, marginalized communities, and part of the answer is I can't blow smoke at you. Part of servant leadership is saying, I don't have the answers, will you please come sit at the table and help me? Will you please pull up a chair and tell me where I'm misstepping or what I don't know? Tell me what life is like in your shoes, because I'm not going to pretend like I know. So I want to make sure I show up for everybody. And that's why I'm out here going to different cities and meeting different people, because I have a very limited experience, but I can't speak for everybody else. And I think the first thing you can do is show up, and then, one, you go back to your husband, and you tell him, right? That's part of this platform. Two, is that you continue to show up for those people. You continue speaking up for them. Then you go to the next event and you say, I just met this person over here, and this is what they're going through, and we all have an opportunity to stand up and speak for that person. Because we don't know what it's like to walk in their shoes, but we know what it's like to walk in heavy boots too, right? So if that person's walking in heavy boots, we should probably try to make their boots a little bit lighter, right? I think that's what that looks like.
All right, guys, we also have time for a couple of questions from the audience. So if you want to raise your hand, come up here to the mic so everyone can hear you. I know that's a little intimidating, but we got you. Yep, come on up.
So I'm a grandmother. I'm coming from a whole different area than your house. And I come from Bucks County, but the lower end, and our township school, Crystal Township, don't have a very good reputation, you know. I also have siblings who live up near Newtown, much better. That's a state thing. It's a county thing. It's a local thing. If Pete gets in, and I hope to God he does, if Pete gets in, how does the federal government force the states to fund schools so that Philadelphia schools can have, I mean, if your license is a daycare provider, how many kids can you have? Like 5 or 6 to one person?
Up to 12. In some
For one
cases.
person without help?
Yeah,
Then why do you have more than 12 when they hit first grade?
that's right.
Why do you have 20 and 30 and more kids? How do you do that? And how does the federal government push towards that? And how do we push towards that?
That's a really good question for Betsy about how do you do that? How do you do that to people? To be honest with you, I don't know what legally Pete can do, so I don't want to misspeak tonight and say this is what the federal government should do and then find myself in hot water when someone posts this video on Facebook. What the federal government can do is just show up and start saying what they expect out of public education. I think having a Secretary of Education who lays out some pretty specifics for states would be one thing. And just talking about the issue. I think it's immoral to ask a teacher to take on a caseload of 40, 50 students at once. I had 10 kids in my classroom. Multiple students with autism, multiple students with learning differences, and I felt overwhelmed. I didn't have any paraprofessionals in my classroom, and I've been in multiple schools that have 0 paraprofessionals, no school nurses, no one who's trained in mental health to help these students. So there's a lot to do. And to be honest with you, I think I'm a little bit better about outlining what I'm upset with versus what we can do, because I'm pretty fresh in this process. And I look forward to when Pete speaks about this with you and when we publish it on our website, and I hope it answers more of your questions. I think part of it is just addressing it. If you have a federal government that's speaking to you, speaking to teachers who understand what's happening in the classroom, it's a good place to start. I'm sorry I don't have all the answers for you, but I hope that you know I am for you.
Hi.
Hi, my name is Sarah and I'm a 7th grade teacher. I've just realized that a lot of people think they know about education because they were once in school themselves, but you don't really know what education's like until you get into the classroom or you know someone who is in the classroom. So can you talk about how Mayor Pete has evolved since he's met you on issues with education?
Yeah, absolutely. I think he's always had that servant heart, and I think his heart has always been in the right place. And then he started dating someone who came home every day. Someone who's going through grad school saying, this is what I want to do. I want to go become a full-time classroom teacher. But at the same time, while I was pursuing that dream, was coming home thinking, oh boy. I think simply by being on the front lines with me, in that I talk a lot, and when I come home I vent a lot, and I lament a lot, and in a way it was a way for me asking for help. And I think it's shaped a lot of his opinions about, obviously he married someone who brought home a very small paycheck, someone who came home crying a lot because I felt unappreciated, was attacked a lot. I always thought my heart was in the right place, but then some parents didn't, some other teachers didn't. I came home feeling pretty beat up. I'd come home at 3:30 and go right to bed some days. I think that was hard for him, because he appreciates teachers. He appreciated that's what I did. I didn't pursue, some career just to get rich. I did something because I thought it mattered, but then I'd come home every day and ask questions until the sun came up about, how are we not feeding these children? And how are we not giving these children opportunities to go outside? And how is it okay for these children to be unhoused? And why don't we have washers and dryers in the school so my kids' parents can just come to school and wash their clothes? And the things that does for kids when they can just at least come to school with food in their bellies and clean clothes on their back. And why am I paying for pencils and paper, right? And most of the days it was just more questions than answers. And I think being married to someone who comes home every day asking those questions and just throwing my hands in the air, like, is this really what I'm going into? Is this really what I'm prepared to do? Because I knew it made sense for me. It's where my heart was at. I wasn't sure if it was going to make sense for our pocketbook because we're talking about starting a family, and I wasn't sure if even that was going to be sustainable. And then I wasn't sure if it was going to be the right choice for my mental health. So I think watching someone go through that day in and day out helped him take pause about the teaching profession and what teachers are going through on the front lines. And I think it helped shape a lot of his policy decisions, and especially with what he rolled out yesterday. I would like to think that I was instrumental in that. Just talking about if, there's a million things we could start with, but I think we at least have to give teachers a raise and start with Title I schools and start pouring resources into some of our schools that are most need. And I think watching his husband live through that helped him change his mind a little bit.
Thank you for giving me a little bit of extra time to formulate my question. Okay, so I was touched that you mentioned earlier children coming to school searching for the love that they're not getting at home, in addition to perhaps the caretaking and the food and the housing that they're not getting outside of school. How do you reach those kids, help them uncover the potential that they're not being able to tap into whenever there's so much on top of that right now? What's worked for you?
Establishing community and a loving culture in my classroom was the very first thing for me. And because I taught at a Montessori school, I was afforded that opportunity. That you meet kids at the door every day. And you have to decide as a teacher, Did they come to school today to be loved, or did they come to school to learn? And that changes for every kid every day. So as a teacher, you first have to figure that out. And then you have to wrap your arms around them. And unfortunately, so many teachers in this country don't have enough arms. They don't even have enough support in the school. The teachers feel it, the paraprofessionals feel it, the principals feel it, the parents feel it. What worked for me, because I had the opportunity, was to create an environment where the kids knew they were loved first and where they knew I expected learning second. So when they came in, I could tell it was a rough day, and I could tell, kids are like volcanoes, and the lava is somewhere different every day. So some kids are this close to erupting the moment they walk in your classroom. Some kids are good to go. Teachers are some of the most capable, intelligent, brilliant people, because every day they have to decide for hundreds of kids where they're at. They have to assess where they're at, what are they capable of every day, what do they need every day. They're not just teachers, they're caseworkers, right? Mental health professionals, artists, they're everything. And we expect them to be everything. For me, building that culture where kids knew they were safe, where they knew they could come to me when something was wrong, where they knew they could be honest with me, where they knew they could just point and I'd go meet them somewhere else. Establishes a level of trust. And in the last school I worked in, that was extremely successful. And it takes months to build that trust and that safety net for them, where they know someone's got their back, someone's in their corner. Unfortunately, with a lot of the other schools I taught at, that wasn't there. A lot of times, those kids are so disenfranchised by 7th grade, they don't trust anybody. It's very hard to create that culture, especially when we come to school every day and tell you, okay, I know you might be homeless and hungry right now, but I really need you to take the standardized tests, right? Because my paycheck's on the line. So as teachers, sometimes we're forced to put all that other stuff aside so that we can force a standardized test down their throat so that we can have our jobs at the end of the day. We got to focus a lot more on community and culture, less test taking, and less standardized curriculum where teachers aren't afforded those opportunities. Because I think schools are at the heart of a community. That just has to be so. We have to make it so. Where parents are comfortable going there, where kids are comfortable going there, they know that they're going to be lifted up there, and they have access to everything that they need there. I think sometimes that sounds like pie in the sky, and we've just allowed ourselves to believe that that will never happen because it's been the norm for so long. And I hope with the right administration in the White House and the Department of Education, we can get there.
I think we have time for one more question. Come on up.
Yeah. Oh, Alex.
So I was somebody who grew up in the education system with Asperger's, and I know what it's like to have education professionals give up on you. And it was thanks to my mom especially, and my dad, who fought tooth and nail for my right to just a basic education. And I know that there are thousands and thousands and thousands of other students who have either learning disabilities or mental health issues that prevent them, where people give up on them because it's too hard to try, and they feel like you should try with them. What is your message to those kids who, people who have been given up on and who don't feel like they have a place in education and in this country?
Thanks. I think you misspoke. I think you meant millions,
millions
of kids in this country,
Absolutely, yeah.
which is unfortunate. One, you're so lucky to have really supportive parents. Thanks, Mom, for being here. Is Dad here too?
Had to work.
Okay, good work. The most offensive thing I hear people say about students with learning disabilities is those kids.
Yeah.
It's the closest I've ever come to flipping a table in an IEP meeting.
I got kicked out of one for that.
that language is used far too often by teachers and people who are tasked with lifting these kids up. We have to change the dialogue from those kids, these kids, to our kids. I've heard far too often the really poor excuses for the way that special education is just allowed to be this other thing, this underfunded thing. I'm going to get really emotional because these are some of the kids that matter the most to me. When I, as a teacher in the classroom, feel like it is my job to do everything for you, and I'm throwing my hands up in the air saying, but where's the help? And I sit in these 2-hour-long IEP meetings where I feel like people are just checking bubbles and talking about my kids like they're a number, and we're not talking about the human. We're not talking about this person who needs us, who's relying on us, who requires us to do our best. We're reduced to numbers, we're reduced to forms, the parents are kicked through the system, they leave schools, and sometimes they end up at schools like mine because they've completely given up on the system. A system that's completely given up on them. And it's hard, and it's not always their fault. They don't have enough support themselves. And that just starts with funding. Making sure that you have enough support in the classroom, the teacher has enough support. And your question was about what my message was. I think the most powerful thing you can do to a kid is look them in the eye and say, you are loved. Nobody ever did that for me. The power that can do to a kid, when they come in and they walk through that revolving door every day, and they just go through the system every day. As a teacher, it's just the most powerful thing you can do to sit them down and say, did you know I care about you? Did you know you're cared about? What do you need? What do you need from me? What can I do for you? But not all of us are afforded that opportunity, because some teachers are carrying 150 kids on their back. So the thing I want you to know is that there are people in the world who love you, outside of mom and dad. People who truly believe in you. And all the wonderful, amazing things you're gonna do for this world. I just don't think you're told that enough. But I also know that that's not good enough. Because, I mean, teachers were told that too, right? You're amazing. Back it up. Back it up with support. Back it up with paychecks. Back it up with paraprofessionals in the classroom who can tell these kids that they matter, who can help these kids realize that they matter. If we are letting down our most vulnerable, then who are we as a society? So just know that a lot of people love you. A lot of people care about you. A lot of people believe in you. You might not hear it enough, but I hope we make you proud.
Awesome.
Okay, all right. I think I get to mingle for just a little bit and say hello and do some photos and stuff. I just want to thank you so much for coming and spending time with me. I've had a wonderful day in Philadelphia, meeting people all over this community. I've appreciated the opportunity just to talk, and not talk at, but talk with. I hope we get more opportunities down the road. If Pete for America sounds like something that you can get on board with, you can go to peteforamerica.com, you can sign up, get on our email list. We've always promised that we'll respect your intelligence, and we won't email you telling you that we need $3 by midnight. But if you're able to chip in, I mean, we're building a plane on the runway right now. We didn't anticipate being here. We didn't anticipate being here this fast. So our team is growing. We're throwing boots on the ground in early states, and we're going out there and meeting with people like you and giving them a hopeful message again. So one, if you're able to toss us some funds, we'd really appreciate that. But two, we really need more people at this table. We need more people in this project who know that this is a message about love and kindness and empathy in service. So if you could reach out to just one friend or 5 friends and tell them about what you heard tonight or what you hear Pete talking about on the trail, I'd really appreciate that too. Because for 90% of the people, they're not tuned in yet. So we gotta help them tune in. And we also gotta help change the channel from that horror show that's happening in Washington. So thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it. I'll stick around as long as time allows, but I'm gonna try to catch a plane and get home to my buddy tonight too. So thank you, really appreciate it. And thank you so much to our moderators tonight. Please give them a round of applause. Thank you so much. It's been wonderful being with you. Thanks everyone.